We've all seen huge great big whales and sunfish and tuna, but those are all animals that live up near the surface of the ocean where the pressure isn't too intense. But for every 10 meters down you go into the water, you add another atmosphere of pressure. We're experiencing one atmosphere right now, exerted on us by the atmosphere. But if you go down to 20 meters, then it doubles, 30 meters, then it triples, and it adds up fast. The limit for recreational divers is about 40 meters because of the intense pressure that they experience. As a result of that pressure, the deeper we dive in submarines, the smaller the creatures tend to get, unless we're talking about creatures that exhibit abyssal gigantism, which is the tendency for very deep ocean creatures to be huge. This is a giant squid that washed ashore in Norway 1954. It's 9 meters long and it's not even the biggest species in this video. Giant squid usually hang out between 300 and 1,000 meters deep, where only 1% of the light penetrates. Squid have 8 arms and 2 tentacles. The difference is that the arms have the suckers all along their length, but the tentacles only have the suckers at the end. The tentacles are mostly just stowed, but they're deployed for hunting and feeding, and they can be up to 10 meters long. The feeding tentacles tend to be much longer than the regular arms of a squid, so if you think, phew, I'm outside of grabbing range, think again, Captain Snack Sparrow.
Oh no!
Another giant that lives in the abyss is the Japanese spider crab, which is the largest species of crab in the world. Their Japanese name is Takaashigani, which literally translates to tall-legged crab, and yeah, that's about right. The biggest one we've ever seen is a crab called Big Daddy, whose huge long legs reach to over 3 meters. He was named after a British professional wrestler called Big Daddy, whose real name was Shirley Crabtree Jr. Big Daddy, the crab, not the guy, was nearly lunch because he was caught by fishermen and was supposed to be sold at a seafood market, but a chain of aquariums called Sea Life bought him and then brought him to the UK to put in a tank. We can argue all day about the ethics of picking him up and then dragging him to the UK to live out the rest of his days in a tank, but I still think that that's probably a step up from just being sashimi. When spider crabs are baby larvae, they're usually found near the surface of the water because they just drift with the ocean currents, and they are one of millions as well, because a female spider crab over the course of a single season can lay 1.5 million eggs. When spider crabs move to shallower, warmer waters to reproduce, they're at much greater risk of being fished because they're much more accessible, and as a result, Japan has laws that prohibit the fishing of spider crabs between January and April, which is their mating season. When they're adults though, spider crabs live around 200 meters deep, which means that they are experiencing around 20 times the amount of pressure that you or I are feeling right now. Almost as much pressure as you'd feel as if Big Daddy was hitting you with the Big Daddy splash where he just jumps on you. Our next giant is the aptly named giant oarfish. The giant it can have, managing about 8 meters in length over the course of its lifetime, but it doesn't look much like an oar, and that's because its pelvic fins are the things that look like oars. The pelvic fins are the weird little fins at the front. You'd assume that it swims like a fish or an eel, but it's much weirder than that. It mostly propels by keeping its body straight and then undulating its one really big long fin. It looks so strange to see a fish just so straight but also moving. It looks like someone's tried to animate a fish but kind of screwed it up because they forgot to animate the body, but to compensate they've turned one fin up to maximum speed. The deepest verified account of a giant oarfish is about 430 meters deep, but they're quite happy to be up near the surface as well. They've been spotted in the Mediterranean Sea just off the coast of France, quite near the surface. We don't know much about them apart from brief encounters and catching them on camera underwater occasionally, but one thing that we do know about them is that they're quite happy to swim vertically as well as horizontally, and they're not the only fish to do this. Razorfish do it too. Razorfish hunt in warmer, shallower waters, and what they do is they hang there face down, tail up, so that they can see their prey, but hopefully hide from their predators. They're blending in with the seagrass as a type of camouflage. Because these fish and their behaviour look so surreal, and because they would have been around during the swashbuckling age of sail, it's thought that they're probably the origin point for an awful lot of sailors' tales of giant sea serpents. If I'd have seen something like this on the few times that I've been on a boat before I was researching for this video, then I would have taken a picture and looked it up. But sailors in the shiver me timbers era of sail couldn't do that, so what they did was they told their friends and their friends told their friends, and so on, and suddenly a sighting of a weird long fish becomes a giant sea serpent devouring ships at sea. Right, what this video needs is more legs. The giant isopod then. I won't sugarcoat it, isopods look weird. They look like an armadillo that's been drawn by someone who's been awake for 3 weeks. They're crustaceans, the same group as lobster, shrimp and prawn, and they've got to be in the running for one of the most successful body shapes in all of history. First emerging 300 million years ago. They've evolved in that time, but the basic strategy of the body hasn't changed all that much. Hella legs, hella armour. You might have had an isopod call at your house in the form of woodlice, called that because people noticed that they're often found near wood, and also because they thought they looked a bit like a louse, a parasitic insect. But woodlice aren't parasitic and they're not insects. What do you call them? That's what I want to know. I've seen this map. I mean, crunchy bats, woody wigs, granddads, you're just saying words now. If you have a different name for them or one of these, then please leave a comment, especially saying roughly where in the world you are, because I'd love to know if people actually use these words. If people actually call them Billy Buttons. Moving on. Woodlice are crustaceans, and they're generally very small, usually a centimetre or less long, but by comparison the giant isopod is, well, it's giant. The largest one on record is 50 centimetres long, and whilst that's not giant squid territory, they do hang out at over 2,100 metres deep, enduring temperatures of 4 degrees C with over 200 atmospheres of pressure to contend with, and that constant pressure and darkness is probably why they have faceted compound eyes so that they can detect very low light changes. I talked about the giant squid earlier, and I think it must have been really difficult to come up with a name for something that's bigger than the thing that's already named Big Thing. What's bigger than giant? Colossal. It's the colossal squid. I know that we started with the giant squid, but the colossal squid is almost twice as massive, and it has the biggest eyes in the entire animal kingdom. And its eyes glow. And they might be cannibals. The squid, not their eyes. Their eyes can be as large as 30 centimetres, giving them the ability to see as much as they can in the oppressive dark that they dwell in. But why do they glow? Research suggests that it's not to spot prey, it's to keep an eye for predators, things like the sperm whale and the beaked whale that hunt the colossal squid. Another thing that might prey on a colossal squid is another colossal squid. They've been found with squid remnants in their stomachs, which implies that they are to some degree cannibalistic. That's not particularly unheard of. It generally happens in environments where food is very scarce, for example, the abyssal depths of the ocean, and as a result, the animals turn to other members of their own species for food. So, giant squid, the smaller ones, are sexually dimorphic, which means that there can be drastic physical differences between the male and female of the same species. The classic example of this is peafowl. The male, the peacock, has this wild iridescent tail, and the female has much more muted colours. In giant squid, this happens as a difference in size. The female is about 275 kilograms, the male is much smaller, about 150 kilograms, but the largest colossal squid that we have ever recorded is about 500 kilograms. To get an idea about what scale these things might grow to, what we can do is we can look at the specimens we have and compare their total size to the size of the beak, because squid are mostly squishy, but their beak is solid because their food has to pass through their brain. So if their eyes get too big for their stomach, then they can literally get brain brain damage, so the beak has to break up stuff that they might eat first. And because those beaks are solid, it means that they don't break down as easily or as quickly as the rest of the squid, which is squishy. So when we find those beaks in the stomach of a whale, for example, we can look at the size of them and estimate how big the total squid would have been. In some ways, it's kind of like finding a shoe and then trying to work out how big of a person would have worn it, somewhat. Anyway, that record holder, the 500 kilogram colossal squid, has a beak of about 42.5 millimeters in size, but we've found beaks that are up to 50 millimeters in size, which implies that there is out there, or might once have been, a colossal squid that's between 6 and 700 kilograms in mass. But why do some animals that live in the deep ocean become so huge? Abyssal gigantism is so hard to research because it's so difficult for us to survive in that kind of environment. One of the things that I think that we can take away from the OceanGate submarine implosion saga is that the ocean and pressure in general is not something that you can just deal with and then you're done. It demands respect and constant attention because it's an environment where death lurks in every single direction. The first possible explanation is that it's bloody cold in the deep ocean. Temperatures usually hover around just a couple of degrees, and if you have a lower surface area to volume ratio in your body, it means that for each unit of body mass, you radiate, thus lose less heat. There's a rule called Bergmann's rule, and it applies on land, and animals that live further up north tend to be larger, and animals that live closer to the equator tend to be smaller. So that kind of pressure to have a lower surface area might lead to bigger organisms, but we don't know yet. It might be the impact of food scarcity, because once you go beyond a certain point in the ocean, the further down you go, the less things can live in that environment, and as a result there's less things to eat. A larger animal needs more food in general, but each day it will eat a smaller portion of its body mass relative to a smaller animal. So a larger animal can fast during lean times, and speaking of fast, they're also going to be faster because they are bigger and have more surface to push against the water, and as a result they're probably better adapted for a lifetime of drifting through an infinite black void looking for food. Because it's so hard to survive in that environment, there are also less predators in general, allowing an animal to live longer than it would have done if it lived in an environment with more stuff that wants to eat it. Abyssal gigantism might also be the result of the oxygen level. Animals of any kind need oxygen to survive, and if there's a lot of oxygen in the environment, it can support a bigger animal. As you go deeper, the amount of oxygen that's dissolved into the ocean water decreases until a point where the pressure, cooler temperatures, and decreasing salinity mean that there's more oxygen dissolved in the water, and as a result, that increased amount of oxygen can support giant animals, maybe. Unfortunately, but predictably, climate change threatens the deep ocean and everything in it. Whilst the deep ocean feels like another world, life in the deep depends on life at the surface. Most of Earth's oxygen comes from phytoplankton, algae, and bacteria that live on the surface of the ocean, and that oxygen that they produce is ultimately what deep-sea creatures breathe. As global warming leads to warmer seas, the circulation currents of the ocean are slowing down, which mixes less oxygen into the ocean, and increasingly warm oceans makes the water less oxygen soluble. The deep ocean is such an extreme and inhospitable environment, but life flourishes there regardless, and its extreme nature gives rise to some of the most fascinating and unique creatures on the planet. Despite being a cold, dark abyss under unthinkable pressure, life has come up with the surprising strategy of creating giants. And whilst they might be the origin of sailors' tales of sea serpents and kraken, the reality is, as always, much weirder. Thank you very much for watching. Leave a like if you liked the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. See you next time.